It was a Friday evening when Claire found herself standing at the front door of her family's suburban house, the echo of the latch clicking shut as she stepped outside. Her parents were off for a weekend getaway, leaving Claire to enjoy the house to herself. At 16, she had been alone for short periods before, but this was different. This time, the house would be completely empty for 2 full days. The weather was turning cold, and the sun had already dipped below the horizon. She locked the door behind her and pulled her coat tighter around her body as she walked to the mailbox to retrieve the daily post. As she turned the key in the rusty box, a chill ran down her spine. It was quiet. Too quiet. The neighborhood was usually filled with the sounds of distant traffic, the laughter of children, and the occasional dog barking. But tonight, the air was thick with silence, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of the dry leaves from the trees. Claire quickly grabbed the mail and headed back inside. As she closed the door behind her, she felt a strange unease settle over her shoulders, like a shadow creeping into her mind. She shrugged it off, figuring it was just her imagination. She set the mail down on the kitchen counter, and as she did, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Something was wrong. She couldn't place it. There was no obvious sign of danger, nothing out of place, but her instincts were screaming at her to be cautious. Claire took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She had seen enough horror movies to know that the tension was often the worst part, a precursor to something terrifying. Claire went upstairs to her room, trying to distract herself with her phone. Her friends had texted her, asking about her plans for the weekend. She responded, telling them she was just enjoying the peace and quiet. Yet, as she typed, a strange noise echoed from downstairs, a faint thud followed by the creaking sound of floorboards. She froze. It was unmistakable. Someone was in the house. Her heart raced as she slowly crept out of her room and down the hallway toward the stairs. Every step felt louder than the last. She reached the top of the staircase and peered down, scanning the dimly lit hallway below. The house seemed darker than usual, the shadows deep and oppressive. There was no movement, but the sense of being watched lingered. Claire felt a cold sweat on her brow as she backed away from the stairs, her breath shallow and fast. The front door had been locked. The windows were all shut tight. Who could be in the house? She returned to her room and grabbed her phone, dialing her mom's number with trembling hands. The call went straight to voicemail. Panic began to creep in, but Claire forced herself to stay calm. She had to think logically. She decided to check every door and window to make sure everything was secure. As she made her way back downstairs, her eyes locked on the front door. It was slightly ajar, the deadbolt still latched, but the knob turned as though someone had tried to force their way in. Claire's pulse quickened. No one had come through that door. It hadn't opened on its own. She was sure of it. Her feet felt heavy as she stepped closer to inspect it, the eerie silence pressing down on her. Just then Claire heard it again, a whisper, faint and almost unintelligible, coming from the kitchen. Her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just the house settling, or the wind rattling the windows. But the whisper felt different, like a voice, low and guttural, just beyond her understanding. She reached the kitchen, and her eyes scanned the room. The mail she had set down earlier was no longer on the counter. Panic surged in her chest as she frantically checked every surface. It was gone. But there was something else. On the floor near the door leading to the basement, the outline of a large boot print in the dust. Claire didn't remember it being there earlier. Her legs felt like they were made of stone as she turned toward the basement door. It was slightly ajar. She had never gone down there by herself, but there was something about the open door, the shadow behind it, that made her heart thud in her chest. Claire knew she had no choice but to investigate. She grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and descended slowly, each creak of the stairs sending chills down her spine. The basement was cold, and the air smelled musty, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. As she stepped onto the concrete floor, the beam of the flashlight swept over old boxes, furniture draped in dusty sheets, and forgotten toys. Then she heard it again, the whisper. This time it was clearer, a voice that chilled her to the bone. "You shouldn't have come down here." The flashlight flickered, and Claire's heart skipped a beat. The beam of light flickered once more before going out completely. She was plunged into darkness. She fumbled with the flashlight, her breath quick and shallow. Her hands were shaking as she clicked it back on, but the light only illuminated the air in front of her, leaving the edges of the basement in total blackness. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a figure, a tall, gaunt shape standing near the far wall, its features hidden in shadow. Claire's blood ran cold. In an instant, she turned and ran back up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached the top, the basement door slammed shut behind her, making her stumble and crash into the hallway wall. She gasped for breath, her mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. Claire didn't dare go back down. She bolted every door in the house, locking herself in her room and pulling the blankets over her head. She could hear faint movements from downstairs, footsteps pacing in the darkness. But she never dared to look again. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. When Claire's parents returned the next day, everything seemed normal. The house was still the same, and nothing appeared out of place. But Claire knew what she had experienced. There had been something in the house, something that shouldn't have been there, and she would never feel safe in that house again. As the years passed, Claire moved away to college, but she could never shake the feeling that the house was still watching her. She would occasionally visit, but the unease never left her. And to this day, when the wind howls outside her window at night, she remembers the whisper from the basement, "You shouldn't have come down here." Home Alone horror story, The Upstairs Window. It was a quiet Friday evening when 16-year-old Sarah found herself home alone for the weekend. Her parents had gone on a short trip to visit relatives 2 towns away. Sarah had stayed back because she had an important school project to finish. She didn't mind. She liked being alone sometimes. The house was calm, and the wind outside was soft. The clock in the living room ticked slowly as Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her books and laptop. The family's small dog, Max, lay quietly near her feet, snoring lightly. Everything felt peaceful. It was around 6:30 p.m. when Sarah decided to take a short break. She made herself a sandwich and grabbed a soda. As she sat at the table and scrolled through her phone, she suddenly heard a soft creaking sound coming from upstairs. She paused. The house was old. It made noises all the time. She told herself it was just the wood settling or the wind brushing against the windows. She didn't want to let her imagination get the best of her. But Max lifted his head and stared toward the stairs. "Probably nothing," Sarah said to him with a nervous laugh. Max didn't bark. He just stared. Trying to shake off the unease, she went back to working on her project. She worked until it got dark, then finally stood up to turn on all the lights in the house. As she moved from room to room, a strange thought crept into her mind. Did I close all the windows upstairs? She wasn't sure. She had cleaned her room earlier that day and might have left her window open. With a sigh, she decided to go upstairs and check. Max followed closely behind her as she climbed the stairs slowly. Everything seemed normal. The hallway was quiet. The lights were off, but she turned them on one by one. Her bedroom window was closed. The guest room window was also shut. Then she checked the last room, the small storage room at the end of the hall. She rarely went in there. She opened the door and the room was dark and cold. The window was slightly open, letting in the night air. She stepped in and closed it. As she turned to leave, something made her stop. She felt like she wasn't alone. She looked around. Boxes, old chairs, dusty furniture, nothing strange. But still, the feeling stayed. Sarah quickly left the room and shut the door behind her. She went back downstairs, trying to act normal. She turned on the TV to drown out the silence. By 10 p.m., she was ready to sleep. She locked the doors, turned off the lights, and headed to bed. Max jumped up beside her like he always did. She pulled the blanket over herself and tried to relax. Then around midnight, she heard it again, a creaking sound. This time, it was louder. She opened her eyes. Max was awake too, ears perked up. She sat up in bed, holding her breath. The noise came again. It was footsteps. Very slow footsteps, upstairs. But she was already upstairs. The sound was coming from above her. She stared at the ceiling. There was no room above her bedroom, just the attic. She had never been up there before. The attic had a small pull-down ladder in the hallway, and it stayed shut most of the time. She got out of bed, her heart pounding. Max stood beside her, growling softly. She opened the bedroom door and peeked out. The hallway was dark. She flipped on the light and looked at the ceiling. The attic door was closed. Everything seemed normal. Maybe I imagined the sound. She turned to go back into her room when she noticed something strange. The door to the small storage room at the end of the hallway was slightly open, but she had shut it earlier. She was sure. She walked slowly toward it, each step heavy. Her hand trembled as she pushed the door open wider. Nothing inside had changed, but the window was open again. She ran downstairs, heart racing. She grabbed her phone and called her parents, but there was no answer. She tried again. Nothing. Then she called her neighbor, Mr. Daniels, a retired man who lived alone across the street. He picked up quickly. "Mr. Daniels," she whispered, "I think someone might be in the house." He didn't waste time. "Lock yourself in a room. I'll be there in 2 minutes." Sarah grabbed Max and locked herself in the bathroom. She sat in the corner, shaking. She heard the faint sound of footsteps again, coming down the stairs now. She held her breath. Then she heard a loud bang from the front door. Mr. Daniels calling out her name. "Sarah, are you okay?" She rushed out of the bathroom and ran to him. He stepped inside with a flashlight and a baseball bat. "I checked around outside before I knocked. Didn't see anyone, but we'll look together." Room by room, they checked the house. Nothing seemed out of place, but when they reached the attic, Sarah hesitated. "I think the sound came from up there," she said. Mr. Daniels pulled the ladder down and climbed up slowly, flashlight first. He was silent for a moment. Then he spoke. There's a blanket up here, and a bag of food." "What?" Sarah asked. He came back down with a serious look on his face. "Someone's been living up there." They called the police immediately. Officers arrived quickly and searched the attic. In the corner, behind some old boxes, they found a sleeping bag, half-eaten food, and even a small notebook. It turned out that a man had been sneaking into the attic during the day when no one was home. The police believed he had slipped in weeks ago, possibly when a repairman had come to fix the roof. The man had been living quietly above them, coming down only when it was safe. The creaks, the open window, the footsteps, none of it had been Sarah's imagination. The man was caught a few days later hiding in an abandoned house nearby. He had a long history of breaking into homes and staying in secret places like attics and basements. Sarah's parents rushed home the next morning and hugged her tightly. They couldn't believe how close they had come to danger. From that day on, Sarah never felt truly safe in the house again. Every time the floor creaked or the wind blew, she would look over her shoulder. Max, too, had become more alert, and sometimes late at night she would find herself staring at the ceiling, listening, because she knew that once someone had watched her.